The first step in any Tableau dashboard is loading data into Tableau Desktop. You can't actually generate data within Tableau because it sits on top of your data. Now, one of the most important skills in data preparation is quality, making sure that before you go into building visualizations, we inspect the data, make sure there's no problems. Otherwise, everything we do from here on in could be wrong. Let's start by loading up the data into Tableau Public. And again, you can use Tableau Desktop if you wish, exact same process. So I'm going to use the drag and drop method. So I'm going to drag it and I'm just going to drop it here. And let's look into the data. And while that's going, I'm just going to open it up again, just so we can refer to it. So the first thing you're going to notice is, there's nothing. Why is there nothing? Well, when you have a Excel spreadsheet and it has more than one sheet, it will display them here. If you only have a single sheet, Tableau is going to be like, well, you haven't really got much to choose from. Let me just bring that in for you. But as soon as you have more than one, it gives you the selection and you have to choose what you want to bring in to the analysis. So if I'm going to bring in output, right, which is the one we're interested in, going back to this one, this is the sheet we're interested in. Sample is just an empty sheet that I made just to demonstrate this. Okay, so I'm going to bring in output and let's have a look at the data. The first thing you're going to notice is that it looks funky. Let me just scratch my leg. The first thing is, yeah, it looks really funky. You have all these F1, F2, F3, whatever, and the title of the fields actually is about here. So what has happened? Well, Tableau by default reads from the first line. So because our data set actually starts at 10, it's not starting at the first line, it's actually having trouble at reading it. So what we can do is we have two options. Number one, actually, let me bring that back. Number one is we can use the data interpreter function, which is right here. I'm going to show you that in a second. Or the other option is to actually delete these first set of rows, making this one the first row. However, there's kind of a disadvantage and an advantage with both. So the data interpreter, which I'll show you right now, it reads the data and tries to guess where those field headings are. It works most of the time. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it works most of the time. Personally, I always try and keep the raw data clean, that the first row is the field headings. However, I don't always have that option, but as much as I can, that's what I try and do, because then I know going into Tableau it will always read correctly. Right, and you want to eliminate as many kind of points of failure as you can, because typically what happens is when you do an analysis or you're working a job, if you're not a consultant and you're kind of going project to project, if you just have like business as usual tasks, the same data is coming in every day, you're processing it every day, and sometimes that raw data changes, and then the data interpreter doesn't work that day and you're like, none of my visualizations work. So you kind of want to eliminate any variations that could occur, but that comes with experience. So let's go ahead and use the data interpreter and let's see how it goes. So I'm going to click that and let's see what it does. So you can see now it has actually correctly identified the start of the rows. Awesome. Okay. The other option is to delete these rows. So if I ever did that, I would actually just do a brand new Tableau Public just to make sure the connection's correct. So let's try that method. I'm going to close this, right? Not save it. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to delete these rows. Now the disadvantage with this one is if someone's pulling this out of a database, or you're pulling it out of a database every day or something like that, every time you get it, you have to open it up and you have to delete those rows before doing the Tableau staging. That's one of the negatives, but sometimes you have no choice and you got to do that. You can do like macros and automation, or if you have more advanced softwares like Ultrix that can do data cleansing like crazy, but they're like $10,000 a license. There's heaps of options as you get better and you get access to better tools. But for now, let's just get rid of those first ones. Let's save it. Then I'm going to close this and let's open Tableau Public again. Okay, let's do that. And I'm going to bring in that file again. Watch what happens this time if we did this correctly. Let's bring in output. Boom. Clean straight away, right? So that's not going to be an issue. Great. Now let's before we do any cleaning, which we're not going to do in this video anyway, I just want to explain more of the layout here. So we've already talked about this is your connection, these are your sheets, right? The union we're not going to talk about just yet, but in a nutshell, it lets you combine data by stacking one on top of the other, right? In a nutshell, you have here the name of this connection in Tableau, right? Basically what you're going to call it. You have your pre-filters here, you have your canvas here. This is where you actually do things like joins, right? Or blending or unions, things to kind of wrangle and stitch data together. I think we're going to cover that in intermediate or expert. I can't remember, but super powerful stuff. Okay, and then here you're going to be spending probably most of your time. Okay, so let's have a look at that and let's look at some of the options. So when you look at this, by default, it will always show it to you like this. But sometimes you want to view it as a list. You can press this button right here. Right, and you can see a list. I sometimes do this to get a more condensed view just to see what I'm looking at. I can see the, the data types. I can sort this A to Z. Maybe I want to compare things. And, for like 8 fields, maybe you're like, oh, I don't see the point. But sometimes you have 200 fields or 400 fields in a single data set. So being able to sort them and do different types of inspections is like really crucial. You'll also see aliases. So if I click on show alias, an alias is basically just renaming the field kind of superficially, like on top. You're not actually changing the raw data of, that's coming in. You're just giving it a new name for Tableau, right? We'll get more into that later. And then show hidden fields. So this is really powerful because sometimes, yeah, you will get a data set with 200 fields, but you're like, I only really need 10 of them. So just hide the rest. And what that does is it gives you a number of benefits. Number one is when you're building, you haven't got so many fields to sort through and get confused and everything. And something that's a little bit more advanced is once you get into the Tableau Online realm, Tableau server, where you're actually pushing data sets to the cloud, when someone else connects to that published data set, they don't see all those extra fields. You're basically giving them what they want. Again, more on that later. Man, so much to cover. All right, so those are kind of your initial building blocks for viewing things. One last thing I will add, especially your data kind of input phase, is when you load data, check it. I don't really see people doing this enough or more than they should. And this is not just a Tableau thing. This is an everywhere data thing. Whenever you're transitioning from one software to another, we're going from Excel to Tableau, or if you're going from Tableau to Tableau Online, or if you're going from, SQL servers to text files, or you're going to Azure, whatever it is, always perform some sort of quality check, some sort of validity check, right? And it can be super simple. Super simple. It doesn't have to be like rocket science, right? And I've done rocket science. It doesn't have to be that complicated. So, for example, here's a simple test you can do. Let me open up the Excel file. Okay, so here is the Excel file. The simplest thing I can do, and let me just make this a little bit narrower, just so you can see the stats on the bottom, right? Is I'll go to here and I'll just count the number of rows. Okay, so I know it's 2,707, so it's including this last one. So if I come in here, I can actually see that. So Tableau only shows you the first 1,000, but you can increase this. Let's say 3,000. So you can see it terminates at 2,707. So I know it's actually loaded everything. The other thing I can do, and again, not super scientific, is just eyeball it. Okay, so I'll go into the Excel file and I'll actually do this. I'll zoom out enough that I can't actually distinguish the writing. I know this is going to sound weird. You can't actually distinguish the writing, but what you can see is the patterns, right? So that's actually what I'm looking at, that how how bumpy the data is. I know it's funny, but this is kind of the little tricks that you pick up over the years, right? So I can see kind of how gappy this is. So from the looks of it, it's like kind of half filled. I can see that this is actually quite narrow. These are quite fat, which means they're quite consistent. We got massive gaps here. It's probably only filled like 5% or something like that. This one's quite consistent with small numbers. Okay, and I just let it kind of scroll up and see how consistent the data is. So I know this is barely filled up. This one seems relatively consistent. Again, just half filled. You got occasionally little bumps there. So we know that most of it's actually already grouped. These are probably just tiny inconsistencies. So you get, again, going up, just eyeballing. That's all. I'm not looking for anything super specific, just eyeballing. Okay. All right, cool. And then what I'll do is I'll do it for this as well and just have a look and go, all right, does that match what I just looked at? Okay, so I'll kind of come down. Yeah, this still looks about half full. Let's make this a little bit taller. All right, I can see this is mostly empty. These dates are actually okay. All right, we can see the result fields are kind of filled out about the same. Again, just eyeballing. Right? And what you'll find more often than not is sometimes you get halfway and then everything's blank and you're like, whoa, that's weird. And straight away you can kind of nip it in the bud and fix the problem. What I tend to see is a lot of people is they'll load it up and just trust that it loaded correctly. They start building the visualizations, they do all sorts of stuff, but they miss the crucial step of data quality. And we have a saying of, rubbish in, rubbish out. So it doesn't matter how good your visualizations are. If the data you're feeding is crap, you got no chance. Also, if your visualization fails, you think it's at the visualization stage, right? But it actually failed so much earlier, and you're not looking in the right spot to troubleshoot, right? So heaps of things to think about. So that's it for this video. In the next one, I'm going to show you, we're going to get started on data cleansing and getting this ready for visualization.